The air in the canyon held a dry, electric charge, the kind that whispers of ancient things. Elias Kane stood over the unmoving form, his sword cold in his hand. 1,000 years. 1,000 years of silence, and the ghost of that face had never truly left him. He'd believed it was over. He'd been a fool. The figure stirred in the dust, long, dark hair pooling like spilled ink against the red rock. Not a hair on his head was out of place from the memory. Julian Blackwood opened eyes the color of old wine, fixed them on Elias with a focus that was both a caress and a cage. Elias felt his breath hitch, a cold terror seizing his throat. The world outside was highways and neon, a frantic hum he'd learned to navigate. This was a relic of a buried epoch, clawing its way back into the light. His voice was a strained whisper, pleading with the impossible. Julian's only answer was a slow, deliberate smile. His hair, impossibly, seemed to shift of its own volition, strands snaking out to coil around Elias's wrists and ankles with the gentle, unbreakable strength of steel cables. The words that followed were soft, yet they echoed with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. The memory of their binding was a phantom pain. He recalled the stark white room of the mountain sanctuary, the disbelief on his brothers' faces. Master Lin had simply shaken his head, of a path paved with heartache. But Elias had been dazzled, convinced he'd found not a curse, but a rare and brilliant destiny. He'd poured that conviction into the ceremony, offering the heirloom pocket watch that had been his mother's. A symbol of time, he'd thought then. Now it felt like a shackle. After the last guest had departed, the silence in the lodge was profound. Elias pushed open the bedroom door, a flush of anticipation warming his skin. Julian was waiting by the window, his silhouette cut from the moonlight. He didn't turn, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. Elias crossed the space, closing the distance. He pressed a light, teasing kiss to Julian's mouth, a grin playing on his lips. The night is young, my love. There's no need for such impatience. He guided them back toward the bed, his heart a steady drum of certainty. He'd studied, prepared, eager to be the guide in this dance. Julian allowed himself to be moved, but his gaze was a dark, smoldering thing. Then, in a fluid motion that spoke of latent power, their positions reversed. Elias found himself pinned, the weight both familiar and suddenly alien. A network of dark hair seemed to weave around them, a silken net. Julian's voice dropped to a raw, possessive murmur, his breath hot against Elias's ear. The accusation was specific, charged with a history Elias couldn't recall. The world dissolved into sensation after that, a relentless tide that left Elias breathless and scattered. In the hazy moments before surrender, a fragmented thought surfaced. The contrast was staggering. This fervent, consuming force bore no resemblance to the aloof, disdainful man he'd first pulled from that cursed circle in the desert. He'd been traveling then, a lone wolf after his mentor's departure. The old man's final advice echoed, uphold the balance. Guard your purpose. He'd taken it to heart. So when he saw the glow of a containment grid in a forgotten box canyon, a figure crumpled within, he hadn't hesitated. The practitioner, a gaunt man with wild white hair, had been screaming about purging an abomination. Elias saw only a victim, robes dark with what he assumed was blood, pale and fragile. He'd driven the fanatic off, receiving only a hissed prophecy of regret for his trouble. The grid deactivated. The figure staggered upright, moving with a pained determination to leave. Elias called out, concern overriding caution, offering help, a ride to the nearest town. The stranger ignored him completely. It wasn't until he stepped closer, into a slant of dying sunlight, that Elias truly saw the face beneath the tangled hair. The breath left his lungs. It was a kind of beauty that felt dangerous, sculpted, and too perfect. He found himself following, babbling questions that now seemed absurd. The man finally stopped, turning. The look he gave Elias was pure frost. The single word he spoke was a dismissal that should have ended it. But the voice, a low, resonant baritone, shattered Elias's assumptions. He stammered, his world tilting. The man merely offered a glance of utter contempt before continuing his unsteady path. The ingratitude sparked a flash of anger in Elias. He demanded some basic acknowledgement. A tense, grudging thanks was muttered, followed by another command to leave. The stranger took a few more steps, then his legs buckled. Elias was there in an instant, catching him. Up close, he saw the stain on the robes wasn't just blood. Beneath the torn fabric, against pale skin, was a mark. Not a wound, but an intricate, crimson tattoo that resembled a dark, blossoming flower. Before he could process it, he was shoved back with surprising force, met with a glare of pure venom. Something shifted in Elias's chest then, a strange, electric thrill at the defiance. He felt his own cheeks grow warm. The man took one more step and collapsed entirely. The rented room above the dusty roadside diner was close and still. Julian, he'd learned the name from a scrap of paper in a wallet, lay unconscious on the narrow bed. Elias worked carefully, cleaning superficial cuts. The mark on his chest was unmistakable now. A lily, deep crimson and startlingly vivid, as if growing from within the skin itself. His fingers hovered, curiosity getting the better of him. A hand like a vice locked around his wrist. Julian was awake, eyes blazing, his question a threat whispered from dry lips. Elias winced, adopting a tone of playful complaint. The reaction was immediate. His hand was flung away as Julian stood, heading for the door. Elias moved without thinking, throwing his arms around the man from behind, holding on. He felt the tension coiling in the body against his, a promise of violence. He released his grip with a deliberate slowness. Julian turned, fury making the strange red of his eyes seem to glow. Elias just smiled, a reckless, charming thing. Julian's response was a cold snort of disbelief. Undeterred, Elias poured on the sincerity, painting a picture of devotion and forever. The effect was not what he intended. Julian recoiled as if struck, his handsome face twisting with a kind of wounded rage. He spat the words, accusing Elias of being a shallow dilettante, his affections cheap and fleeting. Elias protested, listing grand gestures, promises of comfort. Julian cut him off, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. He listed virtues like loyalty, purity, unwavering focus. You possess none of them. This is just a game to you, a distraction. The accuracy was a physical blow. It was true. After years of disciplined solitude, this beautiful, hostile creature was a fascinating puzzle, a spark in the monotony. But as he held that burning gaze, something fundamental fractured inside him. A long dormant screamed to life. This was no simple attraction. This was the precipice his mentor had warned of, the one fate every practitioner of his path dreaded and was destined to face. The old fear hadn't touched him then. A trial of the heart? He'd welcomed it. Julian was human, bound by a mortal lifespan. A few decades of passion seemed a fair trade for the experience. The decision crystallized instantly. The pursuit became serious. He became a shadow. Where Julian went, Elias followed. Through insults, through cold shoulders, through storms of anger, he remained, a persistent, smiling presence. He booked luxury suites in his name, ordered extravagant meals, bought fine clothes that were ignored or discarded. He remembers the afternoon at the remote hot springs, steam curling over the mineral-scented water. Julian had been reticent, refusing to undress. Elias had teased him with a raised eyebrow and a suggestive comment. The challenge was accepted with a sudden, defiant motion. The revelation was staggering. Any trace of insecurity vanished, replaced by a new, awed respect. They sat in the water, shoulders almost touching. For a moment, Elias felt a profound sense of rightness. This could be a life. Then Julian spoke, his voice flat, telling him to leave when the day was done. The old excuses were trotted out. In a fit of pique, Elias took his hand and pressed it to his own chest. Julian tried to pull away, calling him insane. He guided that hand lower, under the water, watching as a storm of raw desire darkened Julian's eyes. He leaned close, his lips brushing a flushed ear. Julian shoved him back, scrambling away, denial a frantic mantra. Elias just laughed, pointing out the physical evidence. The denial was a fragile wall, and it crumbled completely days later in the mist-shrouded redwood forest. It was a known place, where the air could twist perception, drawing out hidden wants. Elias called out, suddenly anxious. A figure emerged from the gray. Julian's grip on his arm was painful. Before Elias could speak, he was kissed with a desperate, consuming hunger that erased the world. He recognized the influence of the place and acted, a sharp motion of his will clearing the air. The mist vanished. Julian broke away, his lips bruised, his expression one of dawning horror. Elias wiped his mouth, a smirk forming. Julian stammered about the influence, about it not being real. Elias closed the distance, tilting his chin up. The mist only amplifies what's already there. Admit it. Julian tried to flee. Elias followed, a torrent of playful needling. Finally, pushed to the edge, Julian spun and slammed him against the rough bark of a giant tree, silencing him with another searing kiss. The confession was growled against his lips, furious and undeniable. After Elias clung to him, triumphant, Julian scowled, objecting to the term. Elias just beamed, pulling the antique pocket watch from his coat. He held it out, his proposal earnest. The promise of forever made Julian go very still. He searched Elias's face, his question grave, demanding absolute certainty. Elias nodded without hesitation. The red in Julian's eyes seemed to deepen. His demands were a litany of obsession, total focus, unwavering fidelity, a threat of lethal consequence for betrayal, a vow of relentless pursuit should he ever try to leave. In the glow of victory, Elias agreed to everything. The celebration at the sanctuary was a muted affair. His brother Marcus pulled him aside, face etched with concern. Elias waved it off, calling it destiny. Marcus had simply sighed, offering a hollow wish for happiness. Their younger sibling, Leo, made a crack about the obvious, earning a flick on the forehead from Elias. The kid had muttered something else, though, about Julian's energy being off, cold and strange. The final comment, delivered with teenage bluntness, was about roles being reversed. Elias had laughed it off, sending him skidding across the polished floor with a minor kinetic nudge. A joke. Until it wasn't. He remembers the exhaustion the next morning, the sharp protest in his muscles as he tried to get up. Julian was there instantly, a possessive hand on his jaw, his voice a low rasp demanding to know where his thoughts were. The intensity was frightening. He was like a constricting vine, demanding every shred of attention, punishing any lapse with a ferocity that left Elias trembling and spent. When he finally lost consciousness, it was a relief. He awoke to see Julian entering with 2 ceramic mugs. One held clear water, the other held something dark and viscous. A ritual, Julian explained softly, a tradition from his people. A mingling of essences to seal their bond for all lifetimes. A strange unease flickered in Elias, but he dismissed it. Different cultures, different customs. He drank. Later, when he tried to leave the room to find his brothers, Julian's hand shot out, gripping his arm with terrifying force. The question was a demand. Elias soothed him with a kiss, promising a quick return. The moment he was outside, he ran, the freedom intoxicating. He found Marcus and Leo near the old training grounds. They took one look at his stiff gait and winced. Leo, of course, made a sly comment. Elias shot back with forced bravado. Their knowing smiles said everything. Time slipped away, and he returned to their quarters long after dark. The room was black. Only the twin points of crimson light gave Julian away. The voice that came from the darkness was flat and deadly. Elias stammered an explanation about losing track of time. At the mention of the others, the air grew colder. Julian advanced, a predator in the shadows, declaring that Elias belonged only to him, that his world must shrink to the space they shared. Elias felt a spike of real fear. He objected, calling the demand unreasonable. It was the wrong thing to say. Julian was on him in an instant, pressing him against the door, his kiss a brand, his words a feverish litany of ownership. Elias fought back, pushing him away, his voice shaking with refusal. The look in Julian's eyes then was of pure, unhinged obsession. He was carried to the bed, the word punishment hanging in the air. He didn't leave that room for days. When he finally surfaced, Julian was remorseful, tending to him gently. Elias, sore and angry, questioned the extreme reaction. Julian apologized, but when Elias tried to bargain for his freedom, the remorse vanished, replaced by a frantic, jealous rage. The cycle repeated, a prison of passion and control. His world shrank to the dimensions of their rooms. Any interaction with others brought stormy jealousy. Any attempt to slip away resulted in a desperate retrieval and another round of punishing confinement. Elias chafed, a free spirit suffocating. Yet, one look at that achingly beautiful face, at the depth of need in those eyes, and he would relent. The love felt real, even if its expression was a cage. Then the changes began. A faint, rose-colored mark, like the ghost of Julian's lily, appeared on his own wrist. His energy waned, his once resilient health faltering, his innate abilities growing sluggish and unreliable. He grew worried. During one of Julian's rare, deep sleeps, he slipped out and drove to a clinic in a nearby town. The doctor found nothing conclusive, suggesting stress and exhaustion. Annoyed and fearful, Elias left. The voice from the alley was a rasp he hadn't heard in months. The gaunt, white-haired man from the canyon was leaning against the brick wall, his smile unpleasant. He pointed a bony finger at Elias's wrist. The mark is growing, isn't it? It's the bond. A soul tether. He laughed, a dry, crackling sound. And he's not human, you know. Elias stared, cold creeping into his veins. The man spoke of legends, of entities born from the echoes of lost love in the spaces between life and death. Rare, ancient, and fundamentally incompatible with the living. Their nature is a poison to your vitality. To stay with him is to wither and die. Elias refused to believe it. The ravings of a fanatic. He walked away, the laughter following him. But doubt was a seed. It sprouted when they left the sanctuary and were ambushed on a lonely road by creatures drawn to the fading light of Elias's power. He was too weak to fight them off. As one lunged for him, Julian moved. There was no struggle. The creature simply unraveled into nothingness. The others fled, shrieking a name that was a legend of the underworld. The truth was a physical blow. The terror was primal. The sweet memories curdled into something monstrous. He ran. Julian caught him effortlessly, his hand closing around Elias's throat. The question was icy. Elias could only gasp, begging for release, pleading his mortal frailty, offering to set him free. The grip tightened, then loosened. Julian looked shattered. He pulled Elias into a crushing embrace, his voice breaking. The refusal was absolute, anchored in the bond they had forged. Elias, in a final surge of strength, broke free and fled into the sky, leaving Julian kneeling in the dust. He returned to the sanctuary a broken man. His brothers asked about his partner. Elias just said it was over. Marcus saw the hollows under his eyes and murmured about the power of a destined trial. Elias could only agree. He had mistaken a cataclysm for a blessing. Julian gave him less than a day. He appeared inside the warded gates as if they weren't there. Elias's shocked question was swallowed by a brutal, claiming kiss. He shoved Julian away, demanding to know why he'd come, why he couldn't accept the end. Julian just looked lost and wretched, clinging to him, begging not to be abandoned. For a moment, Elias softened. He explained gently the fundamental incompatibility, the slow death. He suggested finding another. The words "another" ignited madness. Julian's screams filled the courtyard, a torrent of desperate, possessive denial. Elias, heartsick and terrified, rendered him unconscious and left him at the foot of the mountain. He knew nowhere was safe. He retreated to the high desert hermitage where his mentor had last dwelled, sealing it with a bloodlock. Surely this would hold. Exhausted, he collapsed. The nightmare was of gentle, strangling vines. He woke choking. Julian was there, in the bed, his hair a living darkness pinning Elias down, his face pale as marble, his thumb stroking Elias's throat. He explained quietly, showing Elias the matching cut on his own finger. The same blood opens all doors now. Our souls are threaded together. You can never lock me out. The horror of that, a lifetime of no escape, triggered a rage so pure it overrode fear. He summoned a blade of light and struck. It grazed Julian's cheekbone. Julian touched the wound, his expression one of profound betrayal. You loved this face. Now you mar it. Elias screamed at him then, sick of the endless discourse of love. Did he think of nothing else? Julian crawled to him, wrapping his arms around his waist, weeping into his shirt. His confession was a raw, broken thing. Yes. Without it, without you, I ceased to be. Something in Elias broke. He held the sobbing man, murmuring empty comfort. As he did, Julian struck a precise point on his neck, and the world went black. He awoke in a different cavern, his limbs bound by chains that hummed with a cold, negating energy. He knew them. Soul shackles. Escape was only possible through self-annihilation. The depth of Julian's madness, this love that was a beautifully decorated prison, filled him with a bitter, corrosive hate. The days blurred into a suffocating routine. He was fed, recited to, possessed. He offered only one phrase in return. Let me go. Each time, it triggered a violent, passionate reprisal, as if Julian could fuck the descent out of him. The resentment festered, grew teeth. One evening, Julian asked what he was thinking. Elias looked at him, a cold smile on his lips. He said he was thinking of the canyon, that he wished he'd never intervened, that he wished the containment grid had done its work. The pain in Julian's eyes was real. He asked if the hate was so complete. Elias finally let it spill, a torrent of venom, calling their meeting the greatest regret of his existence. Julian watched him, a terrible sadness in his red gaze. And meeting you was the only joy of all my endless days. The words were a scalpel. Enraged, Elias kicked him from the bed. Julian simply climbed back in, holding him from behind, his breath a whisper against Elias's neck. In the depths of that endless, captive night, a resolve hardened. One of them had to end. He sent a psychic cry, a ripple of distress on a frequency only his brothers would know. He waited in despair. Then, miraculously, they came. There was a blast of light, the shriek of fracturing metal, and he was free, stumbling into the cold desert air. He found the white-haired man in a decaying motel on the edge of nowhere. The man was incoherent, lost in whispers. Elias pressed a vial of concentrated life force into his trembling hand. The man's eyes cleared greedily. He spoke of the entity's nature. Born from love, only love can unmake it. Restrain the soul. Temper a weapon in your own life's blood. Pierce the heart. It will unravel. For good. Elias stood for a long time in the silent desert. The hate had cooled, and beneath it, the love still lived, a stubborn, guilty flame. The man's final was a push. His own body was failing. The choice was die a slow death or end the source. He found Julian in the same box canyon, drawn there by the bond. He had reactivated the old containment grid, its lines of blue energy holding Julian at the center. He stood as before, proud and pale amidst the electronic hum. Elias raised the knife, its edge glowing with his own stolen vitality. His hands shook. He couldn't do it. Julian saw his hesitation. In a move of shocking finality, he grasped Elias's hand and drove the blade into his own chest. Elias cried out, staring in shock. Julian offered a heartbreaking smile, his strength fading. He pulled Elias down, kissing him with lips that tasted of copper and farewell. Then he went still. The grid flared with a blinding, golden light, and when it faded, there was only dust on the wind. Elias fell into a darkness that lasted 1,000 years. He woke in a clean, modernist room. People in simple gray uniforms gaped at him, shouting about the ancestor in the stasis chamber. The world was all glass and steel, frantic speed and isolated souls. His order was a historical society, his brothers' names in a digital archive. Only he remained, unchanged. The bond, it seemed, had gifted him a terrible immortality. Forever alone. He almost admired the poetic cruelty of it. He tried not to sleep, for dreams of Julian were constant. Over decades, the memories finally began to soften at the edges. He was nearly free. The society's grounds featured a garden of night-blooming lilies, their crimson petals a stark contrast to the minimalist gravel. He was staring at them one evening, remembering a red robe and a desperate face, when the flowers began to tremble though the air was still. A figure stepped from between the blooms, solidifying from shadow and memory. Elias stumbled back, the old terror surging anew. He begged, pointing to the impossible world around them, pleading for release. Julian advanced, his hair lengthening like living shadow, wrapping around Elias's limbs with familiar, inescapable gentleness. His declaration was the same, a vow etched in eternity. Elias screamed that it was over, that the nightmare had concluded centuries ago. Julian cupped his face, his touch tender, his gaze deep and knowing. He explained then, his voice soft, "An entity born of love can be resurrected by it. By longing. By a heart that, despite everything, still calls its name across the void." The truth was a dam breaking. The pretense of hate washed away, leaving only the raw, enduring love beneath. He saw it reflected in Julian's eyes, a certainty that had waited a millennium. Elias surrendered, pulling him into a kiss that was an answer and an absolution. Later, curled together, a practical thought surfaced. He asked if Julian had known about the possibility of return, if his sacrifice had been a calculated gamble. Julian held him tighter, shaking his head against his hair. "It was a gamble. I bet everything on your heart." The realization was a profound ache. This being, forged from love itself, was condemned by his nature to destroy what he cherished most, to be shunned for the intensity of his devotion. Elias saw the tragic arc of his existence, and his own resistance to it melted away. He would walk into the fire. He would love him for as long as his borrowed time lasted. The change came in a dream. His mentor appeared not as an old man, but as a being of light. Elias felt a surge of childhood comfort. The mentor's voice was like distant chimes, asking after his life, his love. Elias spoke of it with unwavering certainty. The mentor smiled. "There is a place," he said, "a shore between realms. Plant grows there, the heart's resolve. It blooms daily, but bears a fruit only once in epochs. That fruit can harmonize two discordant destinies. It makes a love not just possible, but ordained. Hope, a feeling long dead, flickered to life. They traveled to a forgotten coastline where a river of shimmering, silvery water met a sea of stars. On its bank grew a plant of crystalline clarity, and upon it, a single ruby-red fruit pulsed with a soft light. They waited, speaking of their pasts, weaving their separate histories into a single tapestry. Julian spoke of his loneliness, his birth from the echoes of other people's lost loves. Elias spoke of his discipline, his arrogance, his fall. As the twin moons aligned overhead, the fruit detached and floated into Julian's hand. He split it, offering half to Elias. Their fingers intertwined. Julian's words were a solemn gift. Meeting you was the fortune of all my existence. Elias brought his knuckles to his lips. You were never my curse. You were my destiny. The wind from the silver river stirred the lilies on the shore, and in the rustling of 1,000 crimson petals, they consumed the fruit, sealing a fate rewritten not by defiance, but by choice.